She slid the termination letter across the desk the way you'd slide a bowl of scraps toward a dog. 23 years I kept that factory from falling apart, and the 31-year-old they shipped in from headquarters wouldn't even look me in the eye. We're modernizing, Mr. Reyes. Your position is no longer necessary. I nodded. I thanked her. That was their mistake. My name is Mateo Reyes. I'm 61 years old. I live alone in a red brick house in the Tremont neighborhood of Cleveland, the house I bought at 40 and paid off at 54. I'm not a loud man. I never have been. When you grow up the son of an immigrant welder, you learn early that this world doesn't reward the big mouth. It rewards the hands that never stop. So I stayed quiet. I worked. And for 23 years, I let people believe my silence meant I had nothing to say. They were wrong. I started at Lakeside Precision Tooling when I was 38. Back then, it was just a metal shop with 40 workers, and an owner named Walter Brennan, a man who believed in two things: good steel and promises you keep. Walter hired me to run a machine. Within 6 years I was running the whole floor, not because I talked well. Because when a $200,000 mill seized up at 3 in the morning, I was the only one who knew where it broke without opening the manual. I knew that place like I knew my own heartbeat, and I loved it like that too. If you've ever worked a job the world thinks is small, the machine, the truck, the mop, the tray, then you know this feeling. The feeling of knowing you're good, knowing the whole thing collapses without you, but nobody ever says it. They just assume you'll always be there. Like a support beam. Nobody praises a support beam. People only notice it when it cracks. I was that beam for 23 years. Now here's the part of my story that matters most. The part I almost didn't tell. Because the truth is, I didn't have much outside that factory. My wife, Renata, passed 9 years ago. Cancer, fast and cruel. We had one daughter, Sophia, and after her mother died, something opened up between Sophia and me that I didn't have the words for. I'm not a man of words, remember, so I showed up instead. I fixed her car. I sat in the back row at her college graduation in a suit that didn't fit and cried where she couldn't see me. And then Sophia gave me Elena, my granddaughter. 6 years old now, with her grandmother's stubborn chin and a gap where her front tooth used to be. Sophia is raising her alone. Elena's father left when the girl was 2, the way some men leave, quietly, without ever looking back. Sophia works as a night nurse at the Cleveland Clinic, 12-hour shifts, and on the nights she works, Elena stays with me. We have a routine: grilled cheese cut into triangles, never squares, because Elena once informed me, very seriously, that squares taste wrong. Then cartoons. Then me carrying her up the stairs after she falls asleep on the couch, her small hand fisted in my shirt. That paycheck from Lakeside wasn't mine. It was theirs. So you understand when Diana Frost slid that letter across the desk. She wasn't just ending a job. She was reaching into the life of a 6-year-old girl who likes her sandwiches cut into triangles. She didn't know that. She didn't bother to know that. To her I was a line item, an old cost to be cut. That's the thing about people like Diana. Let me back up. Walter died of a stroke the winter I turned 58. I remember the morning the call came. I was adjusting a feed line when the phone rang, and his daughter's voice came through, shaking. I set the wrench down, walked out to the parking lot, sat in my old pickup, and cried like a boy. Walter was the first man in my life who looked at me and saw the real worth. He once clapped me on the shoulder in front of the whole floor and said, "Mateo, this place is mine on paper, but it lives because of you." I never forgot that. I thought it was a promise. After Walter died, his family sold the plant to an investment group out of Chicago called Meridian Capital, and everything changed the way it always changes when the suits arrive. First came the people with tablets walking the floor, taking notes, talking to none of us. Then the meetings we weren't invited to. Then her, Diana Frost. 31 years old, a business degree from a famous school, heels that clicked across the concrete of a floor she'd never worked a single hour of. Her first day she stood in front of the whole crew, took the microphone, and said she was here to unlock the trapped potential of the factory. I stood in the back, wiping my hands on a rag, and I thought to myself, this woman doesn't know where the pressure relief valve is, and she's talking about trapped potential. I said nothing. Of course. In her first 6 months, Diana did exactly what people like her always do. She cut. She called it streamlining. She let go 2 veteran maintenance men and replaced them with a cheaper outside contract. She switched our steel supplier to one that quoted 12% lower. She killed the weekly safety inspection because it ate into production hours. Every single time I knocked on her office door, every single time, I told her, quietly, clearly, that it was a mistake and why. She never listened. There was one time I remember it exactly. I stood in her office explaining that the new steel was more brittle, that it would crack the dies under high heat, that I'd watched this exact thing happen back in the 90s. She looked at me for a moment, then smiled the smile you give a child who's just said something cute. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "I appreciate your experience. I really do. But the world has changed, and sometimes people who've been somewhere too long can't see the bigger picture." Then she turned back to her screen. That's how I was dismissed. I went home that night and sat a long time in the dark. I wasn't angry. Or rather, I didn't let myself be angry, because I learned long ago that anger is a luxury of people with power. People like me don't get to be angry. People like me have to be right. And I knew I was right. I just didn't know how to prove it to someone who had already decided my silence meant I was empty. But I kept records. This is the thing Diana never understood about me, and the thing a lot of clever young people never understand about the quiet old man in the corner. We watch. For 23 years I kept a notebook, not because anyone told me to, because Walter taught me on the first day. Write everything down, Mateo. Memory lies. Ink doesn't. So I wrote. Every machine failure and why. Every bad batch of steel and its lot number. Every time someone upstairs made a decision that broke a safety rule. With the date, with the name of the person who signed off. In 6 months under Diana, my notebook got thick fast. I want to stop here for a second, because I think this part matters. If you've ever been the person who got looked through in a room, the one whose warning got waved away, the one whose experience got called the old way of doing things, then this story is for you. I need you to hear what I figured out sitting in that dark kitchen. Being underestimated is painful, but it is also the single most powerful position a person can hold, because the person who underestimates you stops watching you. And the moment they stop watching is the moment you become free to move. She stopped watching me. The crack came in August, literally. One of the big forging dies, the ones running on Diana's cheap, brittle steel, fractured mid-cycle during a heat run. A piece of metal the size of my fist flew off and caught a young operator named Devin in the shoulder. 24 years old, 2 kids. He lived. He was lucky, 3 inches higher, and we'd have been at a funeral. I was the first one to him. I knelt on that concrete with my hand pressed to Devin's shoulder, his blood soaking through my sleeve, and I looked up and there was Diana, standing at the edge of the floor, frozen, her tablet hugged against her chest, her face the color of ash. And in that moment I did not feel vindicated. I want to be honest with you. I felt sick, because I had warned her. I had stood in her office and described this exact thing, and a young father was bleeding on the floor because being right hadn't been enough. Honestly, if that had been me in her shoes, I don't know how I'd have lived with it. I want to believe I'd have walked over, knelt down, owned it. She didn't. She did something else. She started covering it up. The incident report that went up to Meridian Capital said the die failure was caused by operator error during setup. It said Devin hadn't followed the proper sequence. It put the blame on a bleeding 24-year-old who had done absolutely nothing wrong. I read that report. A junior clerk who liked me printed me a copy without being asked, and I felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. That was the moment everything changed. Because here's what Diana didn't know. The safety inspection she had canceled to save production hours, I never actually stopped doing it. For 6 months, on my own time, off the clock, every single Friday, I had walked that floor with my notebook and logged every reading, the die temperatures, the steel lot numbers, the stress fractures forming in the equipment weeks before they failed. I had a complete, dated, handwritten record, proving that the failure was not just predictable, it was predicted. By me, in writing, repeatedly. And I had the emails too. Every warning I'd given Diana in person, I had also sent in a short follow-up email. Per our conversation today regarding the steel from lot 7,741, polite, boring, easy to ignore. She had ignored them all. She had probably never imagined that the quiet old foreman was building a paper trail with the patience of a man who has all the time in the world and nothing left to lose. I had both. Now, I want to be fair to Diana Frost, because this story is not as simple as a villain in heels. I found out later, through a former assistant of hers, that Meridian had given Diana an impossible mandate: cut operating costs by 30% in 12 months, or be replaced. She was 31, drowning in student debt, the first person in her family to wear a suit to work, terrified every single day that she'd be exposed as a fraud. The cheap steel, the killed inspections, the cut maintenance, those weren't the choices of a cruel woman. They were the choices of a frightened one. A woman trying so hard to prove she belonged, that she trampled the very people who could have saved her. I understood that. I did. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving, and it sure isn't the same as staying silent while a young father takes the blame for her fear. Because here's what I knew that Diana didn't. She and I were more alike than she'd ever admit. We were both terrified of being seen as not enough. The difference was, my fear made me careful, her fear made her reckless, and a young man bled for that difference. So I made my decision. I didn't go to Diana. I didn't go to the floor manager. I didn't make a scene. Making a scene was never my way, and besides, a scene is exactly what they expect from an angry old man on his way out the door. No. I waited. I took my severance meeting like a beaten man. I let Diana believe she'd won. I shook her hand, and I saw the relief in her eyes, the relief of someone watching a problem walk itself out the exit. She had no idea what I was carrying. I drove straight from that meeting to a law office downtown, the office of a woman named Priya Sharma, who specialized in workplace safety and whistleblower cases. I sat across from her and I put my notebook on the desk. 23 years of it. I put the printed incident report next to it. I put the email chain next to that. And I watched Priya's eyes move down the pages, slowly, and then stop, and then come back up to my face with an expression I hadn't seen anyone aim at me in a long time. She looked at me like I was dangerous. "Mr. Reyes," she said quietly, "do you understand what you have here?" I told her I did. I told her I'd known for 6 months exactly what I had. She asked me why I'd waited, why I hadn't gone public the day Devon was hurt. And I told her the truth. I told her that if I'd shouted on the day of the accident, I'd have been a hysterical old man with a grudge. But a man who stays calm, who keeps every receipt, who lets the other side commit the cover-up in writing first, that man isn't a grudge. That man is a case. Priya almost smiled. They really had no idea who they were firing, did they? No, they didn't. I want to slow down here, because what came next was the longest 2 weeks of my life, and I lived every hour of them. Priya filed with OSHA. She filed with the state. And because the cover-up report had been sent up to Meridian Capital because Diana had put a lie about Devon in writing to her bosses, what could have been a simple safety violation became something much larger. It became fraud. It became a corporation knowingly falsifying a safety incident to protect itself from liability. That's not a fine. That's a federal matter. During those 2 weeks, I barely slept. Not from fear, from the weight of it. Every night, Elena was with me. I'd carry her up the stairs after she fell asleep, and I'd stand in her doorway watching her breathe. And I'd think, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I doing this for Devon? For the truth? For that little girl's future? Or am I doing it because a 31-year-old woman made me feel small, made me feel like 23 years of my life were a line item to be cut? I sat with that question a long time. I think you should too, whoever you are, listening to this. Because the honest answer is, it was both. It was justice, and it was hurt, tangled together so tight I couldn't pull them apart. And what I decided, standing in my granddaughter's doorway, was this: the hurt is allowed to be the reason you start, but the truth has to be the reason you finish. The hurt got me to Priya's office. The truth was what was on the desk. I let the truth do the talking. The day the investigators arrived at Lakeside, I wasn't there. I'd been gone 3 weeks by then. But the junior clerk who'd printed me that report called me that night, her voice shaking with something between fear and joy. And she told me everything. She told me how the men in the dark jackets walked the floor with clipboards, how they asked for the steel lot records and found them altered, how they asked for the canceled safety inspections and found that someone they didn't know who yet had been quietly conducting them anyway, in handwriting, every Friday, for 6 months. and she told me about Diana. She said Diana was called into the conference room, the glass one, the one where you can see everything but hear nothing. She said Diana sat down across from the investigators, composed, certain, still believing she was managing a situation rather than facing one. And then they slid a document across the table to her, the incident report, with her signature on it, next to my Friday logs, next to the dates, next to the proof that everything in her report was a lie. The clerk said Diana went very still. She said Diana looked through the glass wall, out at the floor, at the machines, at the spot where Devon had bled, and for a long moment she didn't say anything at all. And then the clerk swore this was true. Diana asked one question. She asked, "Who kept these records?" And one of the investigators looked down at the notebook, at the careful handwriting, 23 years of it, and he said a name. He said my name. I wasn't in that room, but I have imagined it 10,000 times since. I've imagined the exact moment Diana Frost understood that the quiet old man she'd dismissed as the past, the man she'd smiled at like a child, the man whose silence she'd mistaken for emptiness. I've imagined her understanding that he had been the most careful person in the building the entire time, that while she was looking through me, I was writing everything down. That was the moment she finally saw me. Too late. I want to tell you it gave me joy. It didn't, not the clean kind. Meridian Capital settled with Devon for an amount that means his 2 kids will go to college, and he'll never have to lift anything heavier than a coffee cup again if he doesn't want to. That gave me joy. That was real. Diana Frost was fired and is, last I heard, facing personal liability in the ongoing investigation. That gave me something quieter, not joy, more like the feeling of finally setting down a weight you've carried so long. You forgot it was there. And the factory? Meridian, terrified of what else might surface, brought in new management and, on the recommendation of the investigators who'd seen my notebook, they offered me my job back. Floor manager. More money than I'd ever made. I sat across from the new director, a tired, honest man near my own age, and I thought about it for real. Then I said no, because here's what 23 years and 1 termination letter finally taught me. I had spent my whole life being the support beam nobody praised, the man who held the building up and got noticed only when something cracked, and I had let myself believe that was the most I deserved, that my worth was in being useful to someone else's structure. But the day Diana slid that letter across the desk, she accidentally set me free from the one thing I'd never been able to walk away from on my own. So I built something of my own instead. I took my severance and the settlement consulting fee Priya negotiated, and I started a small safety consultancy. Just me, at first, walking other people's factory floors with a notebook, finding the cracks before they bleed someone. Devon came to work with me once his shoulder healed. We're partners now, the man who got blamed and the man who proved it, walking floors together, making sure no other 24-year-old father catches a piece of brittle steel because someone upstairs was too frightened to listen. And on the night Sophia works, Elena still stays with me. Grilled cheese, triangles never squares, cartoons. Last week she watched me writing in my notebook at the kitchen table, the same kind of notebook I've used for 23 years, and she asked me what I was doing. I told her I was writing down the truth so I'd never lose it. She thought about that, the way she thinks about everything, with her grandmother's stubborn chin set just so. And then she said, "Is that why you're not sad anymore, Grandpa?" I had to put my pen down, because she was right. A 6-year-old saw what I couldn't see for 23 years. I wasn't sad anymore. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to notice my worth and started keeping the record myself. This story taught me something I wish I'd known at 38. The mistake most quiet people make is believing that if they're good enough, loyal enough, useful enough, someone with power will eventually see them and lift them up. They won't. Not because they're cruel, most of them are just frightened and busy and looking the other way. The world doesn't notice the support beam. So you have to stop trying to be noticed and start keeping the record. Document everything, not out of bitterness, out of self-respect. Because the day someone tries to write you out of the story, the only thing that survives is what you wrote down. So here's what I'd ask you to do today. Find the one place in your life where you've been swallowing a warning nobody wants to hear, and write it down. Date it. Keep it, not as a weapon, as the truth, held in your own hand, where no one can smile at it like a child and turn back to their screen. And here's the question I'll leave you to sit with. If the people around you stopped watching you tomorrow, would that make you powerless, or would it finally make you free? Now, I want to hear from you, because I read every comment, I really do. Tell me, was I right to walk that notebook into Priya's office? Or should I have spoken up loud on the day Devon got hurt? Consequences be damned. Comment 1 if you think I was right to wait and build the case. Comment 2 if you think I should have shouted that very first day. Comment 3 if you think, like Elena, that the real answer was something else entirely. And tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. I love picturing all of you, in all your kitchens and cars and night shifts, hearing an old machinist's story. Have you ever been the quiet one in the room, the one who got looked through? Tell me what happened. I'll be reading. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated and lived to write it down, subscribe and stay with me. I tell stories about the quiet people the world forgets to notice, and there's a new one every week. You belong here. I'm glad you came. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Cleveland to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.